Welcome to CX Energy, and thank you for coming to our presentation on the guideline. I think it's fantastic to have everybody in here, not just from the perspective of wanting you guys to contribute to the guideline, but for the excitement that really JUMAG offers us a platform to project our association out into the broader community in our industry. And I think the guideline is a stepping stone to a much larger development and build out of a digital platform, which is what we really need as an association. I'm speaking today with Dan Bailey. He's an independent writer. Dan, you're from Washington, D.C., is that right?
Chicago.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chicago. There you go, I messed that up already. I wrote it on the slide and forgot about it. So
that's all right.
I think I'll get the clicker and we'll just get going. Maybe. So this is a copyrighted presentation with images that weren't our own. We took from Unsplash, which is open source, and we usually credit the photographer. And you can get AIA credits for this. It's registered with the Institute for Architects. What I want to talk about today is what we spent a lot of time. There's 25 to 30 people who have worked on the guideline. And it's going to launch either next week or the week after, very soon. You'll get separate notification of that through the JUMAG platform. So it gets kind of a soft rollout today to talk about what we're doing. We want to focus on best practices. We figure that the industry spent enough time reinventing commissioning process, and we should get down to the business of teaching providers best practices for doing good work on projects. We cover a large number of building systems. We called it building systems because that is actually the thing that we commission when we do our work. We incorporate all the elements of the CX Energy, of the leadership and performance, triad, ACG, EMA, and BCA, and we offer insights and strategies, and you can see moving forward. A lot of terminology that we'll talk about, but it's really not that bad. At the end of the day, hopefully you'll understand about the independent commissioning services that we advocate here at ACG, how the Building Commissioning Guideline is going to support commissioning services, what Standard 202 means to us as an industry, and ACG, EMA, and AABC as associations, and how to navigate the portal. And here's what we're going to go through. You can kind of see, I'm going to talk about the staff and the committee first. We'll look at the platform. Dan will talk about that in the development, and I'll talk about best practices, some of the commissioning terminology, and then we'll look at enhancements and what the road forward looks like. So I do want to start, want to call out Barry Cromwell. He's no longer with us, but he was a big contributor to our project. He did a lot of work with the WBDG, and he was a really large influence on getting people together and to make us work and to drive forward, and we miss him. We miss the effort. And I'm going to ask these members to stand up because there's been a lot of people who come on the phone 3 o'clock in the afternoon every other Tuesday, and they give 2 hours of their time, month after month after month. So we can take a minute and recognize some of these people individually. Mark Gelfo, I know I saw you, you're in the room, so stand up. Mark is a board member, and he contributed a lot on the electrical power systems. I don't see him anywhere, but I saw him earlier. I know he's in here. Charles, I see you, stand up. Charles Jackson wrote the lighting controls, also a board member. Thank you very much. Christian, I don't see you right now, but please stand up. There she is. Christian did the HVAC and HVAC controls writing. Chris Smith, resilience and energy writer. Appreciate you being here. President of EMA. Peter Turk did a lot of the fundamental writing. He's over there at the doorway. Raise your hand higher, Peter. Thank you. Jesse Felter. Jesse, you've been a joy to work with. Please stand up. Jesse's the next presentation. I hope it's in this room, Jesse. Dick Dutro's not with us today. He did a lot of writing on the fundamental section, the section 5. Brian Marsh is not here, Jesse, is that right? And Brian did building envelope. He was actually the first systems commissioning that got rolled out when we started going to CS. We had a lot of articles published in Consulting Specifying Engineering as the marketing aspect of this, and Brian's was the first article on building envelope commissioning. And you should look at them. They're really nice articles, and they got good layouts. Andy Heitman's at the conference. Are you in the room, Andy? I don't think he is. He's probably preparing for his speech. Andy, we took a lot of information out of the EMA guideline that Andy wrote, and so we credit that here. Lauren, where are you at? Stand up. Thank you, Lauren. Lauren's also on the board of directors. and Lauren wrote the introduction to the plumbing sections for us. Walter Hines in Alaska, and he'd rather be on his boat. But he did a lot of the really early writing on meetings and how to organize the commissioning process, and was a big contributor. Bob Knodler, are you in here? He's probably out there. He is. Thank you, Bob. And Santu, where are you at, Santu? There's Santu. Stand all the way up, Santu. Santu did a lot of work. Thank you, buddy. Bob and Santu did resilience, energy, sustainability, a lot of the Section 7 stuff. I don't know if Justin Garner's here. Does anybody know? There he is. Justin, you wrote the systems manual section 14 years ago when I poached it, so thank you for that. Matt Adams, are you in here? Matt was our IT guy. I guess he's out doing something. Who knows? I hope he's having a good time. And Jim Adams is not here today. He wrote some of the low voltage stuff. And Tom Hedrick, I know you're here, Tom. Stand up for mice. We got to get nice guy to stand up. We took a lot of your electrical stuff and worked it back around. So that was also 2014 work that he did. And Troy Byers, our current president. Thank you, Troy. I want to talk about the staff. That's Anna Kosovo over there. She's the director and owner of CAM, our association management. She helped us get the JUMAG platform, right? Thank you very much for that. Ray Burt, right here. Ray was on most of the committee calls. And Ray, you got a lot invested in this, and I really appreciate all you've done. We also have layout and design consultants, and we also have the JUMAG technical support. And then, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and let you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Great, thank you, Jim. My name is Dan Bailey. I have a background in energy management and strategy consulting, primarily for NG's customers, Fortune 500 companies, higher education, healthcare. Previously, I was with a boutique consulting firm in Chicago, Sieben Energy Associates, which joined AECOM in late 2018. I was a director at Sieben Energy Associates, and lastly, a senior consultant at AECOM before becoming independent. And I've been working on this project since November of 2021, assisting with project management, technical writing, editing, just helping get the whole process towards this April 2022 launch. So I'm going to talk some about the development that we've done so far on the guideline. So what were the motivations for the new guideline? Well, ACG's mission, vision, and core values primarily, one of those core values being training and education, the others being independence and certification. And so obviously, the need to continue to train and educate based on current best practices and guidance provided motivation for publishing the new guideline. And then ASHRAE Standard 202, which was released a few years ago, called for ACG's interpretation of that guideline, or rather that standard, in the form of a guideline, and to expand on that, providing best practices and guidance that really fill out the requirements that are conveyed through Standard 202. Changes in growth in the industry since 2005. 2005 is when the ACG Commissioning Guideline was published, and I don't need to tell all of you how much has changed in the 17 years since 2005. As Ray Burt mentioned this morning, we moved to not even referring to this as a third edition because this new ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline is so different and so much more expansive than what came before in 2005. Technological advances in building systems, obviously, since 2005. It's been a revolution in terms of information technology, Internet of Things, now 5G communications, machine learning, convergence. All of these factors are changing the way that building systems commissioning is executed, but they're also changing the buildings themselves. We've seen a rise of smart buildings, intelligent buildings, proliferation of technologies that commissioning providers today need to be aware of, and that owners are asking about when they're pursuing projects. The increasing variety of building systems to be commissioned, going along with what I just said about the rise in smart buildings, intelligent buildings, there are more systems that need to work correctly. What good is it to an owner to have the most cutting edge system if it does not function properly? Sustainability and resiliency trends. Now LEED was around in 2005 when the guideline was previously published, but I don't need to tell everyone here how much LEED and other sustainability programs have advanced in the past 17 years. Adding to that, often requirements of local, state, federal governments for energy efficiency and sustainability and resiliency. Advantages and capabilities of digital publishing make it possible to roll out this new guideline and incorporate later changes, revisions, expansion without committing to something in print. So what are the advantages of digital publishing? Obviously, it can enable rapid corrections and revisions. It allows for continuous expansion beyond print. Facilitates access from anywhere. If you have a smartphone, you can access it. Ensures that the document maintains relevancy. Once something is published in print, it's not frequently updated, every year after year after year. Using the digital publishing platform, the guideline can be revised nearly instantaneously. Using the publishing platform demonstrates ACG's commitment to utilizing current technology, remaining up to date. And it offers a variety of customizable page enhancements that you cannot get from print. Possibility of multimedia. Down the road, it's possible that some video clips could be embedded in the digital publication. Hyperlinks, obviously, so that you can navigate from one section to another with ease. Pop-up windows. For example, we might have terms that we want to define in a uniform ACG way. You could hover over the term and a pop-up window would define that for you. Subscription access allows ACG to control who has access to the publication and when and how. And we may even be able to accommodate user comments. So there's more feedback that you can get with a digital publication that you can't with print. JUMAG is the publishing platform that ACG decided to use. And I want you to pay careful attention to the spelling, J-O-O-M-A-G, because if you just hear it said out loud, you might wonder what that's about. I wondered what that was about when I first heard that. So it's J-O-O-M-A-G. High-speed conversion from PDF to custom page views. And it's really a single stop for distribution, tracking, and marketing. You can do so much with digital publishing platforms these days that you don't need auxiliary applications to handle a lot of that. Works with various browsers, Facebook apps, offers interactive marketing tools. Learning analytics, if any of you are familiar with Google Analytics for websites, JUMAG offers some of those same functions. So ACG will be able to know, for example, which sections are read most often. And that might mean that maybe those sections should be prioritized for updates before others. And how much time do people spend on various pages of the guideline. So that kind of information can be helpful for planning future expansion and revision. And then publication sales. It offers custom subscription cycles, opportunities for branding, and other functions that you cannot get from print. So what did we plan for the launch threshold? Well, when I first joined the project in November, one of the first tasks was figuring out the publishing threshold. What will we have ready by April? Understanding that it's not print, so we don't have to have everything ready to go. But this is the basic table of contents, the major sections, the 2 introductions, and then you can see the 8 sections there from fundamentals, procurement, 4 phases of the building systems commissioning process, and then a special section on energy management, sustainability, resiliency, and then the last section 8, discipline-specific topics, covers all of the individual systems within the building. And what I expect is that eventually section 8 will make up more than half the length of the entire guideline because there are so many different sections that can be covered in depth. Standard 202 describes the building systems commissioning process in general, but apart from some of the appendices at the end, it does not go into specific building systems. Section 8 will help to fill in that gap by applying the standard 202 process to the various discrete systems. take a minute to talk about the content development cycle. When I first started with ACG in November, like I said, the first task was figuring out the threshold. That included figuring out the table of contents. Before I had joined, for a couple of years, various topics had been assigned to some of the committee members, and a number of articles had already been written. Some of those had been revised multiple times. You could see histories of comments, edits from other committee members engaged in peer review. But there were other articles that had not been written yet that needed to be written. And in many cases, some articles that had not yet been assigned to some of the committee members or board members to write. So the general process, though, is to assign a topic. Then there's a first draft. The peer review process is important to the extent that that's possible, obviously, so that we can reach some sort of consensus about what's presented in the guideline. Then revising and editing following the peer review. And that could go back to peer review. There could be several rounds of revision and editing there, depending on the nature of the content and bandwidth, availability. And then eventually we get to a final draft. My work does come into that revising and editing stage to make sure that the content is fully ready to publish, and I'll go into more details about that later. Then it moves on from me to ACG's designer, who has worked out the page design and the layout. ACG staff handle the uploading and the publishing. And there's another step in there with the uploading and publishing. It's not simply taking a PDF and uploading it to the JUMAG platform and then saying, okay, it's ready. Like I said before, JUMAG offers various enhancements. So the PDF can be tweaked, and when you will have an opportunity to load it up, it won't look like a standard PDF. It will have one of those magazine layouts that maybe you've seen when you've looked at other publications online. And so ACG, over time, will be able to roll out additional enhancements to that JUMAG publication. Again, because it's all digital, it can be updated at any time. And then periodic review. The guideline, once up, can be reviewed. Comments can be solicited, corrections made, revisions made, and sections added. In terms of technical writing editing priorities, this list here is much of what I did, making sure that technology was uniform, capitalization, abbreviation, so that when you look at the different sections of the guideline, I was not necessarily trying to create a single voice. I wanted the author's own words to shine through to some extent. But there did have to be a standardization in terms of terminology, capitalization, abbreviation, so that when you go through the guideline, it looks like a uniform guideline. Consistent third-person point of view, so if I can take you back to high school English class for a minute. First person is I, we. Second person is you. You do, you did. Third person is the commissioning provider, the commissioning team. Similar paragraph length and structure, filling gaps where I see them. Sometimes I would ask questions, request clarification from the authors just to make sure that I understood what they were saying. Now, I am not a commissioning practitioner. Like I said, I do have a background in energy management, and the firms that I've been involved in had engaged in commissioning, particularly existing building commissioning. So I know some of the vernacular. I'm not a novice by any means. But because I'm not a practitioner, I was able to read the content from the authors from a critical lens of thinking, would someone who is not an expert in this understand this? Whereas if I were an expert in commissioning, I might gloss over some of the points because I already know it myself, right? So having a healthy knowledge about it, but not being an expert really helps lend that critical eye to it. Proper transitions between topics, splitting very long sentences, references to other guideline sections. So, hey, for more information about sampling strategies, go here, that sort of thing. Fact-checking and citations, grammar and spelling, identifying terms for an appendix that describes ACG's definitions for various terms. Now, we did not attempt to define everything, meaning that we're still relying on ASHRAE 202's definitions, and to the extent possible, we did not want to conflict with those. There are a couple of cases that Jim will discuss where we adopt different terms because Standard 202 is a consensus document, and sometimes that means that the standing standard committee might arrive at terms that nobody is entirely happy with, but they're a consensus term that everybody can at least accept. So in a couple of cases, ACG uses different terms. And then overall clarity and readability, just making sure that there's a good flow, that someone reading it can easily understand it. And Jim, it's back to you.
So that gets us to talking about actual commissioning process. And Dan, I'm sorry about the technical writing. Didn't realize we were doing third person, so I'd go through and take all the thes out, and he'd go back and put them all back there. Appreciate it, though. There's not enough good things you can say about Dan. He's done commissioning guideline day and night for at least a month, so maybe 2 months. It's been a deadline that he's really tried to make, so I appreciate all you've done, Dan. I want to talk about best practices because that's what we're here as an association to do and to promote and to teach and to advocate for. And number one on that list is independent third-party direct for owner. I think we all know that, and we represent that. Owner and building system end user advocates, the reason we commission building systems is to make people comfortable and capable of living and doing their work in buildings and living in there. And we promote a comprehensive approach to commissioning. The biggest threat facing us today is commoditization of commissioning. That's been going on for a long time. And just a bid war and a race to the bottom. And we need to be in a position of professional procurement and so forth, as I mentioned down there at the bottom. It makes no sense to continue to reinvent process. And so since ACG had its fair input on the guideline or on the on the ASHRAE Standard, as any association, it seemed appropriate to just use the national standard and work with that as our baseline. There are a couple bridges that are too far, and we'll talk about them. Terminology and process, really need to reflect the whole industry and not just some niche group that does commissioning. For the longest time, ACG has been perceived as a bunch of balancers out there doing commissioning, and I look in the room and I have a hard time finding the balancers. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being in test and balance, and there's nothing wrong with doing test and balance and doing commissioning. But ACG is not an association of balancers doing commissioning, far from it. We're an association of primarily PEs that advocate for independent third-party commissioning. And the idea of the process and the best practice is to engage and use a collaborative approach with the design team, the project team, the vendors, and owner personnel in order to get an ability to turn a building over in a collaborative manner. People need to buy in. You have to sell the building at the end of the day. That's why you're testing it. It's called acceptance. Application details are going to be in here for specific buildings. So the first 6 chapters really go through the process. But when you get to 7 and 8, we get specific. And we need to incorporate, the paradigms of today for sustainability. I'm not sure if we got to do all this by 2030, but we obviously have to do controlling our emission, controlling our energy use, and so forth. So there's the standard. I thought that Wade was absolutely right about starting with the strategic guide. So that's free. You can go to ashrae.org, pull it up, and get an overview. The stakeholder guide, ACG is an author in there with a lot of other associations. And then this is really an extended version. When Dan says we're using ASHRAE Standard 202, I think he's real specific about that because those are the definitions that we used.
Right.
But there's a good way to go to that glossary there in ASHRAE if you don't see it in ours and try to kind of sort through what some of the terms are that may not exactly line up. And it's a good document. It's part of the references that we used. So we're not just saying ASHRAE 202 standard, but to look at these other documents. This is the ASHRAE commissioning suite. The first commissioning guideline that came out was actually in 1996. That was ASHRAE 1.1, which was the HVAC commissioning process. The AABC commissioning guideline in 2002 took that ASHRAE Guideline 1 HVAC commission process and turned it into an independent third-party model. And we've really always followed as well as we could, except for some terminology. And you can see there's a suite now, and Wade also mentioned 0.2, the existing systems and assemblies. I'm reading the drafts on that now, and it'll probably publish this year, so it's going to go through acceptance and peer review right now. Ross, I know you're probably looking at it. And then you can see the other documents. The HVAC is 1.1, existing HVAC is 1.2, O&M, which is a really good volume, 1.3, systems manual. Everybody writes systems manuals now, I know you do, so that's really a fundamental. And then smoke control. And Wade mentioned 1.6 data centers. That's probably a couple years out, but 230 is coming. And then 1.7 is ongoing commissioning, and I bet that one probably comes out before the data center one does. So ongoing will have its own guideline as well. And that's the other beauty, when you combine the digital platform with the ASHRAE parallel, we're going to benefit from documents that ASHRAE uses to advance the industry well. And we want to work this way so that we can make our network take advantage of that 55,000 group network, and we continue to grow and expand our message. So let's talk language. The abbreviation CX and ASHRAE 202 does not mean commissioning. How about that, Tom? It means commissioning process. So whenever you see the abbreviation CX, you're really looking at a word, two words. It means commissioning process. And we have adapted that. And it's just something to keep in mind when you're reading it. So it's a commissioning process plan. It's a commissioning process team. There's nothing wrong with saying commissioning team, but what I really don't like is when you go to do functional performance testing and people want you to schedule the commissioning. And it's like, well, hell, I've been on this job for 1 year and 8 months, and now I'm going to start to actually do something. So it's commissioning process. This is where language matters. And if we go out in the field and we start using vernacular, then we dilute our potency as an industry. So let's talk about commissioning process when we're talking about it. All right, commissioning provider is also defined, and we used to call it a commissioning authority, and of course our certification is named commissioning authority, which actually I think is a good thing. But in the commissioning process, we're talking about a commissioning process provider, a CXT. That person could be a CCP, a CXA, they could have ASHRAE certification. They might not have certification. They're the person providing the commissioning for the owner that the owner selected, so they're the CXP. So that's the term. The building system guideline builds on existing history. And one thing that we really want to point out is that the total system balance that AABC had endorsed years and years ago, I remember way back to Ted Cohen coming really strong with it. And it's the process of testing, balancing HVAC systems and control systems to perform the design, intent, and operate at optimum level. It's a pretty far way to go for commissioning on HVAC systems, pretty close to comprehensive. The CXA is a qualified independent third-party commissioning that's got our certification. And then the CXT, of course, we know that's the person who doesn't have the CXA qualification, but is working in that direction and actually is a really good technician or specialist or whatever. All right, now, here's a bridge that was too far. ASHRAE Standard 202 calls the commissioning team the project team. Some of us that were on the drafting of 202 understand why that was, and it has to do with consensus building. But when I'm executing in the field, and I say project team, nobody is thinking of commissioning, all right? And everybody knows what a commissioning team is. So sometimes I think you just have to apply common sense. The guideline is going to call the commissioning team, and we're going to call the project team. So the commissioning team is a subset of the project team, according to ACG. The design team is a subset of the project teams. All the contractors, all the vendors, the owner, everybody, project team. When I talk about, or when we talk about contractor, a lot of times in the guideline you'll see the contractor, okay? What we mean is the prime contractor who's holding the contract and everybody else underneath him. So the contractor could mean 200 different companies, you know. But we'll call the commissioning team and just define it that way if you want to. I mean, obviously you can write your commissioning plans and your specs or however you want, but that's what ACG is going to recommend, and that's how it is there. And then one other thing that I think is terribly confusing is the people who provide, like Troy's company, whoever works with him out in the field and consultants that he hires, Those people provide the services, the commissioning services. And if we call one group the commissioning provider group, the CXP team, and we call the other group the commissioning process team, the CX team, is there going to be any confusion? So what we've done in the guideline is we talk about the commissioning provider group. Now the CXP could be an individual or could be a firm, but all the people that support him within his organization, within the commissioning provider, that's what we're calling the CXP group. And another thing we do in the guideline is when we use commissioning process, we always write out 2 words, commissioning process, so it doesn't get too confusing with the whole CXC thing. Because we know it's going to be commissioning team and all that, not commissioning process, but I'm hopeful, and the committee's very hopeful, that this kind of streamlines your ability to kind of identify the different people. The other thing we're going away, you know, we forever had pre-design, design, construction, acceptance, post-acceptance, and now we really are going to do the 4 phases that we see in the ASHRAE table at the end of Standard 202. And project initiation, design, construction, and occupancy and operations. When I talk about insights and strategies, I'm really thinking that by using the guideline, you can look how to take different networks, different processes, and you can put them together into a really good commissioning plan. And you can use assets from ACG, EMA, AABC, that huge ASHRAE suite of documents that we talk about. We also have USGBC, and the new construction documents are good to use. The LEED AP certification, we talk about that in the sustainability section quite a bit. And you know, now there's a whole bunch of GBCI. You have WELL program, you have PEER, and so forth and so on. So there's a huge sustainable volume of work out there that we talk about and want people to know about too. New technologies, we talk about SharePoint, using Teams, you know, different types of things. We try to use non-proprietary language when we do that. There's articles in there on fee structure development, O&M, energy management. You can see what's up there. There is even some decarbonization in there. Santu did a lot of work on that. Thank you, sir. And then discipline-specific commissioning topics, I think, is really the overall value. And what we have now is we have electrical systems, and what's going to launch will include lighting controls, daylighting controls, emergency power, and low voltage. And there's a lot of other electrical systems that will follow on that. Then we also have for HVAC right now, we have HVAC equipment and HVAC controls. We're hoping to get down to the multi-zone air handling unit, chilled beam, you know, induction diffuser, you know, level at you know, future updates of the guideline. There's a general life safety article in there. Brian wrote that published in CSE article on building envelope. And then we had a couple contributors, Troy and Lauren for sure, on getting this domestic hot water and, as the element. Now in domestic hot water, we'll want to have, you know, sump pumps and, you know, build those out as well, but we'll do that. Hot water recirc is in there now. And then EBCX. So is this mine or yours?
That's yours.
Probably my last slide. These are resources, again, kind of a reiteration of what I said before. I'll look at the ones on the bottom. Whole Building Design Guide. I don't know how many of you go there, but you really should. Jerry Kettler just rewrote the whole front end documents for the WBDG. And they're very consistent with what we've got in the guidelines. So that's another thing that the guideline's doing, is trying to liaison and keep things current with other organizations as well. U.S. Department of Energy, Energy Information Administration can tell you things about what percentage of this type of buildings. And then of course there's the CBEX data, which EMA talks about all day long, which is with the Commercial Energy Building Consumption Survey. And then Energy Star, and you probably get Energy Star emails all the way, but I tell you what, that Chris Costas this morning knocked it out of the park on market development and stuff, and he was using these tools. And when you talk about that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So that's you. Thank you.
Me. Thank you, Jim. So when the guideline launches in a couple of weeks, it will not be final because it's a digital publication and it will be enhanced. There are also some sections for the guideline that are intended for the launch that will not be quite ready at this point. These include Section 5, Construction Phase, Section 7, Energy Management, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and then a few other subsections as well. So these are still in development, and the intention is to add these sections before we launch. I looked at the numbers this morning to remind myself of where we are. There are 165 individual articles or subsections within the current table of contents of the guideline, of which 138 of those, or about 84%, are within the launch threshold. So there are some additional sections we've identified that were not as critical to include in the April launch, and those will be written later. But there are a full 138 articles, and these range in length from 1 page 11-point font to 10 pages 11-point font single-spaced. So I think Ray Bird said this morning the guideline is already about 2 to 3 times longer than the 2005 guideline, and that's definitely the case, and it will continue to expand. So what other near-term goals does the ACG Guideline Committee have for the guideline? Well, these goals include budgetary and cost estimating tools, content-related images, graphics, diagrams, flowcharts, those sort of things. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and at this point, the guideline is entirely text, but the intention is to add images, graphics, diagrams, flowcharts. I mentioned earlier sections that are not part of the April launch, but that have been identified in the table of contents. Those need to be written and included. Project case studies. It's always helpful to have case studies of actual projects to show how the building systems commissioning process is applied in practice.
I thought that would be really good for pop-ups like you talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, particularly for the discipline-specific topics. You could have pop-ups of case studies of dealing with specific building systems or specific activities in the commissioning process. And then expansion of particularly the electrical system and the mechanical or HVAC system in section 8, the discipline-specific topics. And I'm going to take a closer look at the electrical system potential expansion here on the next couple of slides. So I want to give a quick shout out to Jesse Felter, who is sitting over there, because the outline that you see on the right is adapted from something that he produced several months ago as a possible expansion of what the electrical system could look like in the guideline. And don't worry about trying to read what's on the right there. I'm going to go into that in more depth on the next slide. But in the April edition, the electrical system is covered in 5 sections that you can see there. Lighting, daylighting, emergency power, low voltage, all written by different authors that Jim covered earlier. And, but what could an expanded edition of that section look like? And you can see at the right that it will be multiplied by a factor of, looks like about 6 or 7. So let's take a closer look at some of those possibilities. First, expanding into equipment and systems. So lighting controls are already there, including daylight harvesting, but splitting daylighting controls into harvesting and window shading. Still looking at emergency power. But then looking at distribution equipment in a lot of detail. Normal, emergency, power monitoring and metering, grid harmonizing technologies. And then moving over to the right, 8.2.4, low voltage systems can be greatly expanded into, and the divisions here I've adopted from master format for what you see here. So communication systems, safety and security systems, and some specialized systems there. And then going back down to the bottom left, plug load control systems, renewable energy technologies. So connecting building scale batteries or electrical system requirements for photovoltaics, that sort of thing. And then interpretation of industry guideline requirements, I think could be a very important section. So providing best practices and guidance for ACG's interpretation of how to meet requirements for different standards or guidelines or certification rating systems that you see listed there and potentially others, and then a reference list. If you're all familiar with the term wiki, or if you're not familiar with the term wiki, you are certainly familiar with Wikipedia, which is the world's encyclopedia basically online. And I know that when the digital guideline was envisioned, it was envisioned in part as a wiki. Now it's not open to editing by everybody in the world, of course, that will be much more tightly controlled. But that's kind of its intended purpose in a way, to cover all of these different topics of building systems commissioning, which you can afford to do in a digital publication versus in print.
We do have some priorities too, you know, like for example, the 8.2.3 section would be one we'd want to write sooner because that's part of lead requirements and there's a greater industry need for that. And then there's still more build out. You could get into, you know, cogeneration, microgrids, you could go on with this.
Right.
If you read Santu's article, you'll see what all you can do.
And Jim, I think
that gets us to
all I
market
have.
transformation, which is a great place to be. I said this earlier, Chris Costas this morning, the keynote speaker, talking about, you know, exactly what we need to be doing at ACG, which is market transformation. And he's literally in front of our association saying, here's how we do market transformation so there's more commissioning services. And there's a lot more that we can do at all levels. We can work at the city level, the federal level, the state level, and we can also work with these different associations. And then we can work with public-private partnerships, and then we can also work with the federal government, particularly when the federal government does things like the NEDA testing requirements that Jesse's going to talk about here in a little while, where if you do certain requirements and specifications, then maybe you restrict the number of people who can actually do the work, and then are there really enough people in the workforce to accomplish that work? So that's the kind of thing. I wanted to read what Buddy Dyer as mayor has been doing in Orlando that Chris was talking about this morning. But this Greenworks Orlando, 84% of greenhouse gases from the buildings in their system, 84% of the greenhouse gas productions in Orlando is from their buildings. 84%. There's a lot of cars in Orlando, but 84% of greenhouse gases, they say, are coming from buildings. Only 25% of that 84% is residential. So right there is market transformation. You need to commission commercial buildings in the city. And to do that, he's requiring mandatory LEED silver. There's a market transformation. He's requiring investment grade audits of energy. There's market transformation. He's bringing the term EUI, Energy Use Index, into a forefront in the city of Orlando to rate their buildings. He's using Energy Star benchmarking to measure performance on buildings. These are market transformation. We write about these in the guideline. We publish them in industry publications. We use the JUMAG platform to develop blogs and develop interactive means. And we promote the need for these things in other cities and other places. And we use cases like Orlando to help us get it out into the broader community. If you score less than 50 on an Energy Star rating in Orlando, he said, you have to do mandatory existing building commissioning. We got a lot to write about existing building commissioning in the guideline and to promote out in the industry as well, and that's one of them. You know, you want to build your city infrastructure up, you want to move towards sustainability, you want to go net zero. That's market transformation that we can get behind. Financial and tax incentives. They actually give money and they rebate money for improving energy. And then private sector incentives are also important. So the industries and the commercial businesses, think of how much money is wasted in, you know, improper air conditioning in warehouses or over refrigeration. I mean, it's incredible. Think of how many empty spaces there are, particularly following COVID, that are just being air conditioned and heated day and night, day and night. If you could just turn off all the empty spaces, think of what the energy savings would be. Commissioning, energy management, test and balance does that. That's market transformation. And that's why I'm believing in the digital platform, because we can do things. We can get feedback, we can find out what our association members are interested in, we can put polls and surveys out, we can connect it all back to the energy of the guideline, and we can bring in whole building design guide comments, we can quote things from ASHRAE or from USGBC, and we can really move forward with our market transformation by doing that. Do you have the clicker? Go ahead and just round up one. And the last slide is just workforce development. And I'm not going to steal Jesse's thunder, but he's going to talk a lot about what NEDA certification requirements are doing for testing in, you know, Department of Defense projects that have specification requirements that are unrealistic. And I want us to talk about that, but some states have professional engineering restrictions to do commissioning. Do you have to have a professional engineering license? That's a conversation worth having. That's where a blog would really come, and maybe the answer is for some yes and for others no. I don't know the answer to that, but that's market restriction right there when only PEs can do it. So transform your market. And then we got involved for a long time, Troy, with the Department of Energy. Remember all the job task and the NIBS thing. I want to know where the jobs are. And we need to get back with them, and we need to redefine some of these task force, these JTAs, these job task analysis. It's great to have a lot of existing building commissioning emphasis, but that metric is really skewed improperly. When you write guidelines and you look at what the workforce is doing versus what the JTAs are, I think we need to use our association to bring pressure on the government, on the Department of Energy, to say, hey, we are a huge workforce that's about to explode, and you need us for every one of your sustainability and energy conservation imperatives, and we need to bring this JTA back and revisit it and get the right associations involved in it. And then training. We can offer workforce training. I was talking to Sam the other night about EMA development and what it takes to become self-sustaining financially as an association. And it's a network opportunity, right? What happened to ACG years ago when we went through AABC and certified everybody in AABC who wanted to do commissioning? What did we do? We looked out there and said, well, we need to certify PEs, right? And that was the networking moment. That's when AABC embraced the commission or the PE industry, and we developed ACG with the strength of professional licensed engineers in here. And that was a big moment. We can do similar things moving forward by offering training in the workforce. The biggest low-hanging fruit for commissioning certification are building owners. Building owners have so much trouble buying outsourced. Your business model could be a huge component of training owners on how to do commissioning services. You commission a building and you leave behind the tools and the training to do that. And then we grow certification industries, and you grow clients and dependability with people who will call on you when they have larger, more complex jobs that they can't handle with their own staff. So I really love that we had Chris Costas this morning as our keynote speaker, and we need to look at doing webinars and things of that nature, and including in workshops how we need to do workforce transformation and workforce development. I think those are two of the most important things. I think that's the end. We got a little bit of time left. We can probably take a couple questions if there are some. It's usually going to be Dan's fault, though, I can tell you right off the bat. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to know anything about the guideline that we didn't tell you? Probably more than you needed to know. All right, let's go make phone calls. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.